The study of English literary criticism begins with an understanding of the classical period and the important critics of this period. We are in the 21st century, and as learners of English literary criticism, it's important to understand the relevance of the classical period and the critics of the period. The study of classical criticism gives insight to a student into the critical way of thinking. By studying classical criticism, learners get sense and understanding about how the literary theories increase a person's capacities to think critically without the bias or prejudice or preconceived notions. The student also has a chance to study different points of view in the context of different genres of literature. Furthermore, the learner can develop critical sight and insight not only to judge the literature but also to evaluate any good piece of literature of the present time. The Greek and Roman critics belong to the classical school of criticism, which is still relevant today. The basic concepts they have given us to study literature with are still important and supply us with the basic ideas whereby to examine the literary text. These critics are commonly understood as the four pillars of classical criticism: Plato, Aristotle, Horus, and Longinus. Plato, Aristotle, and Longinus are Greek critics, and Horus is a Roman critic. Let us also look at the important contributions that they have made towards the realm of literary criticism. Plato spoke about mimesis or imitation. Aristotle introduced to us the theory of tragedy. Horace spoke about the concept of decorum or propriety, and Longinus spoke about sublimity in literature, or that which is sublime. Let us also look at the time period during which these critics lived and wrote. Plato lived during 429 to 347 BC, and his most popular work is The Republic, which came out in 375 BC. Aristotle lived during 384 to 322 BC. His popular work is Poetics, and that came out in 330 BC. Horace lived during 65 to 8 BC, and his work is Ars Poetica, which was later on translated into English as The Art of Poetry. Ben Jonson too was a member in the translation group. Longinus lived during 1st or 3rd century AD. We don't have a confirmation to his lifespan as well as the period during which he lived, and his popular work is on the sublime. Let us now look at Plato in detail. Plato was the first to expound a theory of art in general terms. That is probably why you begin learning literary criticism with Plato. He is also regarded as the enemy of poetry because in Book 10 of the famous work Republic, he banishes all poets from his ideal state. He does that on two grounds. The first is metaphysical and the second is ethical. Plato states that art is an imperfect reflection of the real world, which in turn is a shadow, a pale reflection of the ideal world. And so, art is an imitation of an imitation, and therefore it is thrice removed from reality. Art's heart are third-hand distortions of truth according to Plato, and this view goes by the name of doctrine of ideas or forms. The second objection that Plato raises against poetry is on the ground of ethics. Plato regarded the study of morals as basic and wanted all arts to be guided by moral principles. Imitative art has a corrupting influence on man who should be governed by reason and not passion. A philosopher is the moral custodian of the welfare of his people. He has a right to stand in opposition to any form of artistic imitation that deviates from the norms of reason. Hence, he condemns poetic imitation on the ground that it fed and watered the passions instead of drying them up. Let us also look at some of the other important ideas that he has shared in his Republic. He advocates strict censorship, and he asks poets to inculcate in people the moral virtues of forbearance, tolerance, and rectitude. He prefers narrative form over the imitative. He also has a positive view of art, and that he has expressed in Book 5 of Republic, but it's rather he argues that it must contribute towards the spiritual growth of people. For Plato, truth is the end of imitation and not pleasure. And as you can see, he has made so many contributions towards literary criticism that he actually helped in the growth of this field. And therefore, he is a pathfinder, and he inspired people and also gave direction to criticism. Now let us look at Aristotle and his contributions towards literary criticism. At the very outset, what you learn regarding Aristotle is his counter-arguments against his master's arguments. As you know, Plato is Aristotle's master. Both Plato and Aristotle uses the word imitation. Plato used the word imitation in a derogatory sense. He considered imitation as mere mimicry, but Aristotle interpreted it as a creative process. When Plato compared poetry with painting, Aristotle compared poetry with music. It is thus that Aristotle successfully refutes Plato's charge of poetry imitating mere externalities. For like music, poetry captures the soul or essence of experience, internal as well as external. Plato considered poetry to be a copy of nature as it is, but Aristotle gives it the scope of being concerned with what ought to be or what can be, and thereby idealizing reality. Plato contemns the very fact that poetry arouses emotions. Aristotle insists that these emotions should find expression. Plato regarded poetry to have a bad influence morally, intellectually, and emotionally. Aristotle states that poetry has a good and healthy influence. Now let us look at some of the other important points regarding Aristotle. He is also called the Stagirite, as he was born in Stagira. He is regarded as the founder of Lyceum, the academy. His master Plato's academy was called the Academy, and later on Aristotle began Lyceum. He was the disciple of Plato and also the tutor of Alexander the Great. Interpreters of Aristotle used the term achromatic with reference to his works, by which it is meant that each work of his cannot be completely understood without the aid of his other works. Rhetoric and Poetics contain the literary criticism of Aristotle, and both works are his lecture notes. As you know, he was a peripatetic philosopher, which means he used to walk on his foot and share his ideas and thoughts to his disciples. His disciples are the ones who took lecture notes and later on published these notes. These are what we have got, and it's from these notes, lecture notes, that we have compiled Poetics and Rhetoric. There are 4 important concepts that Aristotle speaks of in Poetics, and these are the ones that we learn as part of literary criticism. And they are mimesis, catharsis, hamartia, and spoudeos. Let's see each of these 4 terms in detail. Mimesis, we have already looked at what the concept is, but still for your understanding, both Plato and Aristotle use the term mimesis. For Plato, imitation implies copying and hence trivial and insignificant. For Aristotle, it is creative and dynamic. The artist is the maker, and his creations are imitations of human action, human character, and human emotions. It is a representation and not just copying or a representation of men as they are. The artist imitates things as they ought to be. So, as I said earlier, he idealizes the world that he sees around him. Coming to catharsis, it is a key word in Aristotle, occurring only twice in Poetics. It occurs in chapter 6, in which tragedy is defined. The twin emotions of pity and fear are dangerous and unhealthy according to Plato. Pity is aroused by the magnitude of the suffering undergone by the protagonist, and terror by the knowledge that tragic suffering and fate will overtake him. This is the awareness that is brought home to us when we witness a tragedy. Pity and fear describe a process of moral and imaginative identification with the agent. When we come out of this involvement, we find ourselves inwardly transformed, and a feel or a sense of release and serenity is felt. Catharsis describes this process or experience. The third concept is hamartia. This term is usually rendered into English as tragic flow. It derives its meaning etymologically from archery. It means to miss the mark, to err or fail. Hamartia is a personal error in a protagonist's personality which brings about his tragic downfall in a tragedy. This defect in a hero's personality is also known as a tragic flaw. You come across Hamlet's procrastination, which is his tragic flaw, pride, which is King Lear's tragic flaw, over ambition, which is Macbeth's tragic flaw. These are all hamartia. Spurios or noble character. For Aristotle, character is what determines moral choice. Tragedy imitates noble character and comedy base character. For the audience to feel pity, the hero should possess noble character. It is one of the requirements of a tragedy according to Aristotle. However, Aristotelian concept of nobility is not socially determined. Aristotle demands moral nobility rather than nobility of birth in the heroes of tragedies. Tragedies become successful when the death of their heroes has a profound effect on the society in which the hero lives. Now let us look at the Roman critic Horus. Horus is popular for odes as well as Ars Poetica. In 23 BC, the first 3 books of odes came out, and in the final years, he wrote his Ars Poetica. Horus, as I said earlier, is best known today for his odes, which often celebrate common events such as proposing a drink or wishing a friend a safe journey. His Ars Poetica, which was written in the form of a letter to Pissos, has also had a profound influence on later poetry and criticism. In it, Horace advises poets to read widely, to strive for precision, and to find the best criticism available. Let us look at some of the important points regarding Ars Poetica. It's also important for us to understand why there is this shift from Greek to Roman. Alexander, the greatest of the Greek emperors, Aristotle, the greatest of the philosophers, and Demosthenes, the greatest of the orators, died within a short duration of 12 months of each other. And with the fading away of the grand and glorious Alexandrian Empire, the focus shifted from the 4th century BC Athens to Rome in the 1st century BC. Horace's major work of literary criticism, written towards the end of his life, is Epistle to the Pissos, which has come to be known as Ars Poetica or Art of Poetry. Ben Jonson was one of the translators of this text. The translation was published posthumously in 1640. This treatise is in the form of a versified epistle addressed to a patron of the arts, El Piso, advising aspiring poets as to what they ought and ought not to do if they wished to succeed in their poetic ambition. It is conjectured that the title by which it is known was given to it by Quintilian, who was another Roman rhetorician and literary critic. It is a kind of a guide to the art of literary composition. Let's also look at some of the other important factors related to Ars Poetica. Ars Poetica has a threefold structure. The first part is about content of poetry, the second about style of poetry, and the third part is a discussion on poets. Horace says that the ultimate goal of poetry is to instruct and to afford pleasure. poetic decorum is primary for him. This is the word that is often associated with Horus, the concept of decorum or propriety. Poetic decorum is primary for him, and this is the norm by which to judge all works. Horus says that a writer should exercise judgment in his choice of words, for words have personality and are subject to the laws of change. Horus seems to favor verisimilitude, which means the process of inculcating elements of truth, semblances of truth into what you write. In the mode of narration, he opts for media res, beginning in the middle. Excessively violent incidents ought not to be presented on stage. The appropriate practice of drama requires 5 acts, and the chorus should be the spokesman of what is morally right and just. So these are some of the other ideas that he has shared in his work Ars Poetica. As I said earlier, Horace Ars Poetica is more or less like a guideline for composing good art. And these are some of the guidelines that he has given us as far as poetic composition is concerned. Next, let us look at Longinus. Longinus is the name associated with the Latin treatise commonly known as On the Sublime, one of the most influential and perceptive works of literary criticism ever written. The third member of the classical triumvirate of criticism besides Aristotle and Horace is Longinus. The authorship of the treatise, Peri Hypsos, translated variously as Elevated Writing by Wordsworth, On the Sovereign Perfection of Writing by Arthur Quiller Couch, Elevation of Language by Alan Leight, but accepted by a large body of the readers as On the Sublime remains unsettled even today. The name of the author to whom the work is ascribed is just a conjecture, and even the date of composition, 1st or 3rd century AD, is uncertain. On the Sublime is written in epistolary form. An epistolary form or epistolary work, as you know, is usually written through letters, journal entries, or a combination of the two. Longinus dedicated the work to one Postumius Terentianus, a public figure in ancient Rome. The aim of a great work of art is to transport the reader out of himself. It has a capacity to move the reader to divine joy. This is the quality of sublime. This is where Longinus talks about the idea of sublime or sublimity. Let us see what sublimity is. A great work of art does not only please or instruct, but it also moves, transports, elevates the readers. It pleases all and it pleases all the time. By the word sublime, Longinus means elevation or loftiness, all that which raises style above the ordinary and gives to it distinction in its widest and truest sense. According to Longinus, sublimity consists in a certain distinction and excellence in expression, and that it is from no other source than this that the greatest poets and writers have derived their eminence and gained an immortality of renown. Building upon his theory of sublimity, Longinus classifies its characteristics. He says that there are 5 sources to sublimity, and they are capacity for great thought and a firm grasp of ideas, inspired emotion and strong passion, use of figures of speech, noble diction, dignified and elevated composition. Longinus also talks about the false sublime. Making a distinction between the false and the true sublime, Longinus says that the false sublime is characterized by turgidity or affectation, puerility or called pedantry, and false emotion or sentimentality. Turgidity is the use of bombastic language. It is as great an evil as a swelling in the body. That is what Longinus believes. According to Longinus, it is drier than the dropsy. While turgidity is an endeavor to go above the sublime, puerility is the sheer opposite of it. It is a thoroughly low, mean and ignoble voice. It manifests itself in cold pedantry, and thereby the work ends in frigidity. The false sublime also results when there is a cheap display of passion, when it is not justified by the occasion. So these are the four critics that we focus on as part of classical criticism. I hope you have an understanding regarding the four critics as well as the important concepts that they have shared through their popular works. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet subscribed.